Oh, yeah, d'accord.
Oh, loving the water question, Lera. Uma Jubeka Sungutwa. Kanzi Rawan Juji, Tuneba, Kedin Dirita, Zimber Machina. Yansar Lowe, Shawan Jujura, Telechina, Kangi Long at Yuruson. She is some water. Tanda Marazu Samasivara. Any Mekumba Nella Maki, Churchubala Mekumba, Kuga Mangan Nella Maki, Kiamala Mache, Ra. Any Rao Castle, Combene, Dawaki and Joba Chusangange, Combene, oh, Combene, Nicasura. Not sure. Combene, Nica, the soda, Danger Milu Samachilicator. Church not to be Rawi Machilicator, Kanzi Rawan Juicy, etc. Church will Rawi again. Church not to shake a Hakonga, Tindicicator, as a Kanzi Rawan Juices. Tanda said de la Tawata, Kiwachimalia Pembe, Lega, Sure, Karichigina teacher, social Rawayo, or the Eswara Tanda. Oh, Mekombe net, Tundu educated, and Rawayo Marwa. Oh, it is a Kanzi Rawan Juices. Oh, Tendetine, Rawayo Captilia, never to church of good Eswara. Chedit my by Kiwachimala, me, church of good es. Tanda Rawayo is Sosolia. Tudi Trubal Rawa Yutuza, Niandu Tendo Kawaki Magile Soso Rawa Reservat and the Kusana to Soso Rawayora, or the country Rawa Juices. Two neighbors. Timbe Yuna Tunji Kanga Jode Yulikate Ordo, country Rawa two neighbor. Getting Derita Zimber Machinas. Or the Negatilia, Soso Kiwachimati, Mekombe Nelia, Tanduta Nelia, Maluache. And then had a meat Kavalania, Zintu Bashivoresora, Zimbasana Mama Sarcia, Simtu Bashivoresora. Get the Dirita Timber Machinas. Yasar Luas and my Yasar Chilon Sasona, don't do Jilike Sasona. Tinichega your Marisera. Tenira Tungele Tongensu your Marisu, Chetu your Marisera. Don't reach it Teura. Yasar Luas, Jujua, Telechina Kangelo, you do Suji. And at that time she checked her Marisera, leg de Bunion Cheteura. Telesina Kangelon. Yeah, teach sooner to this.
So here, as the great master Chandrakirti has said in his entry to the middle way, if when free and living with favorable conditions, we do not retain this status we enjoy, we will fall into the abyss and be at the mercy of others. What could enable us to rise up again from such a state? So right now we have all of the freedom and sort of endowments, the favorable kinds of conditions. We are free from those 8 states lacking freedom. Having been born as a human, we have all of the capacity, the independence or autonomy to be able to practice the Dharma. We have the kind of intelligence to understand what we should and shouldn't do. And so here we can have the ability then to practice this Dharma that will bring us happiness in this life, as well as good benefit in future lives. And so while we have this kind of opportunity, while we have in our hands all of the abilities to create the causes for such a good rebirth as a human or a god, to be able to retain such a status, hold on to the kind of life that we have, if we were to allow ourselves to disregard that and fall into the lower realms, then if we don't prevent ourselves from, say, taking a rebirth as an animal, how could we possibly get ourselves out of that kind of situation? When you fall into such a rebirth, if you say born as an animal, no one can protect you from suffering. You just sort of have to go through the experience of your ripening karma and have neither the intelligence or the sort of ability to be able to practice the Dharma, to engage in the proper kind of causes for a good rebirth in the future. So if we don't sort of take advantage advantage of this or use this situation that we have right now, then we're to fall into those lower realms, then how could we possibly get ourselves up out of that state again?
Cho nên tại vì đó là theo cái luật của nhân quả, mình tạo nghiệp gì mình sẽ thọ hưởng cái quả đó, cho nên tới lúc đó sẽ không ai cứu vớt mình.
Ôi thế sao đó? Ôi ta tận đó có, chứ mà các bạn chúng mà rồi thì kêu sang nghe khởi làm mà là thì cứ đi số số là chú về tận đó ra ngoài rồi đấy, ra ngoài về cấp tiền liền à, này à bây giờ chú bữa đấy. Mẹ con bên này là mà chỉ cái sao số này cái chuyện thập sĩ họ mà đấy xong cái đó, thì đi ta thập sĩ chơi cái đó sẽ khai sinh ra sẽ sao mà, mình cái vào chụp bằng cái vào chụp chụp vậy đấy, chụp đi tiền đó, mình đó là mình có vào thập sĩ chụp đi liền, điều ngay yêu sum gì con này, sẽ là sao bằng, sẽ là phép bắt chụp vậy đấy, chụp đi sao cái đó, ta chúng ta đi cái là cái sự chụp chụp xíu đó, chụp chụp, thế thì cũng vậy đó. Thì đi cả số đó, đi chuyện này chỉ mình lấy xem mấy sẽ xong cái đó, thì đi thì là bây giờ nó xong cái đó, bây giờ mi bao nhiêu xe đó, mi bao nhiêu số số tiền bây giờ đã nè, còn cái tiền cho cái mấy cái yếu sẽ thì là nè, còn mi tiền bạc cái trả từ nhẹ trong cái chuyện này là cái chuyện của đấy xe đó, thì đi xe cái còn rồi rồi tiền gì cái giống đấy đó. Đó cho nên mấy bao thì tôi mà chơi chơi, lại cái mà chơi chơi, cho nên mấy bao thì càng bao lạc bao thắc về bao tam giờ lùng bao đông bao trên là bao yêu sao nữa, cho nên cái chơi ở mà đó chơi đó, thì đại sinh ở đó tôi thằng đó, rồi chơi mấy bao này sinh cái chơi là thì bây giờ này, nghe xong rồi mình đuổi chơi là đam mê đuổi chơi rồi chơi ở đó chơi đó, ta mà chơi cái sao nữa này ta tung lên là chơi thế rồi mà tôi chơi cái ở mà đó, thì đại sinh đi xong cái đó, ya thì chứ nữa.
So, here in the future, what kind of good or bad birth that we will take is really in our hands right now. We have all of the kind of freedom to be able to achieve a good rebirth. And really, it is dependent upon our practicing the proper causes, abandoning the 10 non virtues and engaging in the 10 virtues, getting rid of those kinds of actions that are harmful to others with our body, speech, and mind, and working to benefit them as much as we can. Like last time we talked about, we need those 16 dharmas for a higher rebirth. That's what we need to do, and we need to do it now while we have the kind of circumstances conducive to that. There's often an example given of like someone who's like a hero, really strong and powerful. When they are in their own land with all of the kind of conducive circumstances, they could achieve whatever they want. They can kind of vanquish their enemies. They can, achieve their aims. But if you were to take that same person and tie up their limbs so they're bound up and then throw them into an empty land, like they couldn't do anything at all, no matter how powerful or heroic they are. And so right now, while we have all of the autonomy, where we have all of those kinds of conducive circumstances, it's really up to us to take advantage of this freedom, use the kind of opportunity that we have, and ensure that in the future we still have such a good kind of a status or a rebirth.
Để không sinh vào những nơi cõi thấp. Nếu sinh vào cõi thấp thì mình phải trải qua toàn bộ những cái khổ đau ở cõi thấp.
Ôi à, thì cả tâm về cái sự sống cái đó, cái sự cái gì mình kêu là chưa được bằng, kêu là chưa được chuẩn na. Nên nghe xong chơi là như cái mà đấy, xong nghe xong thì kêu bây giờ cái thấp sĩ chơi là kêu mà đấy xong rồi. Mình kêu chưa được bằng, kêu là chưa được nằm chim mình là thì ta sẽ là cho bằng kêu là chưa được chuẩn đấy na. Cái là nghe xong thì kêu bây giờ chơi là nó ra mà đấy xong rồi. Cái là nằm chim chỉ là để chúng ta mà chịu chịu mình kêu chưa được chơi chỉ thế na. Cái là tiền cho chơi là cái gì này ra mà đấy xong rồi. Chưa được chuẩn cái họ mà rồi. Thì đi cô. Thì cái chuyện bữa giờ đừng có cho áo có cái đó, ya, cái gì lần.
So, as the Kadampa geishas used to say, if you abandon the 10 non-virtues and engage in the 10 virtuous actions, as in you abandon harming others with your body, speech, and mind, and engage in actions that are beneficial, even if you were to try to search out a lower rebirth, you couldn't get there. You haven't accomplished the causes for that. You've ensured that you're going to get a good rebirth. Whereas on the other hand, if you go around in society like lying and cheating others and doing all these negative actions, even if you search as much as you want, you won't find a good rebirth.
어디 있어라. 어디지? 어디 인도 가서 오래. 된다. 맞아. 최야 당부도 야부치 두고요라. 뒤 야부치 삼도 당부도. 뒤 송부도 그 생각도 미개와 주방 개와 주주베디 셰라 주주도 셰라. 뒤 셰도 치료바 쪽에. 근데 나뭐그 그런저 뒤 셰라 페바 주바다. never pamba te cheji she so ase tima do ane ngondo lada me ko ba thobje ke lamda tharwa thoya ke che shanda yo mar be se yore timena ane lyu ko ne su su kale mamu cha ya do lyu ya tong tre ne se che ba la so ba kala ma se che lyu kam chu ne pe te ba ta chu tin de che da do ane tinna she ya ta chiru ba che ne menga te ba se do 소볼 강에테 된다 초실 매바 이메 매식주고요 매가서 봐서도 어디전에 소보도 막감주는 동에 얌주는 문화 접주치고라 뒤득바 다네네 타르바다 뭔돌함이고만 또 타르발 토그레시고라 근데 답시선다 요 말베세 저어지라 우마른 제트와커서 고불루투 잡베른 제트와커서 저어지라 Mane te yo mare se te kale kya te le toa ji sera sobo kale ke so kale tan kala ma se te o tinde se te sera le don che ba sera le toa ke ba le don che ba ta la ne che me sera te le che se mare sera kare se ne che se te shala chawa pang ba ta shala pemba tu ba ko de sera le don che ba ta la ne che me se 시대 세나서 주세들이야. 샬라 차와 방바다 템퍼처가 매우 실시하래. 어디인데 최세대 어디 거기도 와. 제마세 소소소소 류ля 강에 전에 대대 버리셔라. 대에 손을 깨지 내서 그래. 소소소소를 차와체 소체 된데 시에 탑시 제초 말으셔라. 대 전에 차와래셔라. 대에 손을 깨지 교래 대 타바다 것도 토에 좀 말해서라. 최신의 건데 거르시나 샬라 소아파 샬라 템버 투버데 또는 쳐데 팀만에 쳐려 말아 자주 sem고나 샬라 템버 공부하라 이리 차다 방구 섬나 샬라 템버 투고도 근데 기부총이나 메기와 주방구르스도 샬라 차방구도 자팀 동반이 공부자 이리 차다 그 자와 쳐야 된다 동반이 공부하라 나 삼사네 간제파 차다 반에 다방구르 샬라 다와체 방구도 어디 인데 거 추세데 진짜지 거래서 샬라 차와 방 펜바투바 펜바투바들래 펜바 자치 좀 마모 용구라 펜바투야 될라 봐 네 차와 방 버들래 자치 좀 마모 용구라 어디 되겠네 딜래 추세를 해서도 어디 인도 가서래 어디 지켜나야 무슨 되지
So, therefore, like, if we do this initial Dharma well, I mean, this is really what the essence of Dharma is about, is abandoning harming others and doing activities that benefit others. And so, there are, like, practices by non-Buddhists, where they engage in extreme forms of asceticism in order to, say, purify their negativities. They think that such practices are the methods for achieving a higher rebirth and liberation. And so the question sort of arises, well, isn't there something more that is necessary than just that? I mean, so For example, they will do things like cutting off food, engaging in extreme fasting, or something called the five fires, where they're surrounded on all sides by fire, and then there's the sun above, and they sweat, like sort of imagining that they are sweating out all of their negativities. But as the Master Nagarjuna has explained in his Precious Garland, sort of asking a question of, well, isn't there something more that needs to be involved than just that? Just torturing your body isn't the Dharma. And so really it's not the Dharma because it doesn't involve abandoning harm or benefiting others. Really, that kind of action towards one's own body is a kind of like violence, a kind of harm toward one's body is something that is non-virtuous. It's not going to go toward the cause of a higher status birth or liberation. And so in order for something to be Dharma, it really needs to have that kind of abandoning harming others and benefiting others. That's the sort of basis of all Dharma. So whether we are talking about bodhicitta, where we can see that's a mind developing the wish to be able and actually working for the benefit of others, or even if we are trying to get rid of our afflictions, our attachment and our hatred, working toward that is something that eliminates harming others. Emptiness gets rid of that grasping at a self that it in turn leads to our animosity and so forth.
진다 추좀 서서와 담주 람부치라 진바타에 추좀 송에 서바공에 티페게 침브레도 알아 요 진바세들이야 잠바된 것도 샬 팜바트는 것도 추좀 세들이 처방바된 것도 남바전에 어디 탐절 처방부여라 진다 추좀 되네 서바공에 티 담베치 람가 침부데 저래 담주 람부치라 가시 마구세 tuta shanda chiruba tozo tele kushab chigme dojera kare sanero chawapanga sede chita chama chawapanga kongyara mi soso dozo chawapanga shanda chawachana digre sandigo mara nangbayana ko chawa kansa soso pantuma to karena cheka so shede sula chawacha chomara mire sura semje su kadejine chawacha chomara tando na chawacha chomara ta shanda zo ka 추기 추진세 만주피에 와라 만주피에 따다 마해다 대조 따도줄 세가 마무템 아니 한 시주네 배 동에 마무탄의 시주네 셔바피에 와라 다네 마해 예자요다 마해 다니자 저게 대질 세기라 너무 가셔요래 단다요 대조 차와라 ane kache se o mi rik chichu tagdo miri di tujare ti dan drawa che shau mare ti timna po shau mare se ngazu miri yakbuti di tsache bure kondu ti tsawa chigara tendu le to wara chigira tendu kidane kondu lagwa chagire tila lagwa chama cho timna po ma cho se yara tendu senge yogora tezu tsawa rawa ane kache se na o ti ra lo da tezu da kunjo ngazu saya nangare segara saya nangare sebala tiba yo mare se te kunjo ngazu saya to da kande nangare se sena dhyuse se da chawapang yo mara khachil pang yo khachma te chawapang sing mare sa namba ge chawame bala shiche se chawala shiche se te shanda yo mare tamju lambo chela kambagu se kushab chigam do se ra tele lo so ne wa tanda tu tandle shune lamga lokwala ru we se ra 다들 셰트나 만들 남가 lokal 정게 텐르도서 리다도서 진도네 남가 실신 자다 신다 추다 벨라가 두자데 고데 튕게데 튀네 샹다저 대실 냠도 추샤그래 네 강에서 그래 어디나시 지게 소볼 칼레트 tindeche ti lavshade te yavu impresam shanda dinal do soso pon mi shanda pon ro o tinde le sagire se tinde songda o te sonda Take another number to pay cash and to some Saturday. How could I send a mix egg? Cash what is good now?
So here again, the foundation in Buddhism is really an ethics of abandoning harm and engaging in those activities that are of benefit. And things like generosity, ethics, and patience are emphasized particularly at the beginning. I mean, we see in generosity there is that kind of love for others, and ethics is really encompasses that kind of abandoning harm, as well as patience, right? Being able to bear with. And so it said that, other outsiders don't have respect for this kind of the teachings of the Buddha. There are various traditions wherein, although they might say that they don't believe in harm, really they they act in ways that don't have that as a foundation. Like this is something that is particular and is special to Buddhism. We see that there are some traditions, for example, in which they engage in like animal sacrifice. They think that by slaughtering many like oxen or bulls or other things that they can, take themselves to a higher rebirth, or this is sort of an offering for their gods. So here, although they might for some select beings not engage in violence or harm, toward others, they're actually taking their lives in the name of religion. And so they clearly don't have that sort of non-violence or non-harm as a basis. And there are other traditions that make distinctions among people, sort of see them in this kind of with partiality, even having systems wherein they look down upon some so much that it's like dirty to even be touched by them, or you wouldn't want their shadow to fall on you. That kind of making distinctions and looking down upon certain types of human beings is something that involves harm, that involves violence. They're not holding that kind of non-harm, non-violence as a foundation. And there are others that say, oh, well, maybe we don't harm humans, but other animals, for example, goats and sheep and so forth, were given to us by God for us to eat, for us to use. And so they engage happily in killing those animals, not thinking in any way that that's actual harm. They're just sort of using what has been given to them. So there are many traditions that hold sort of certain tenets, principles that are in not in accordance with this and with the Buddhist kind of ethics of nonviolence. And it's sort of like when you have one grazing animal that's going towards a cliff, all of the others will follow it. And so here they lead others to ruin. They lead themselves and others to ruin.
미치 살 레유 나 레제 더유나 디페찬 송도아 살 때네 야랑고레스 리셋네 마투르체 리셋네 야테네 랑고레스 디나싱가라죠 마투르 돈드레데 카레 지소 심제레야 미치소에나다 던지치소에나다 데솔레아 차와치야다 차도치야다 텐데텐 디바사비오라 카가 마투르 돈드레데 데솔 첼람 텐다데 투르친데 라마투르 투르비아라 ताते यारो कदेस दोडस ने ओति समझे कोरा चुलते ने रंग चलम ते जो दे यारो ताने ने या लांगो रे संगरे सते ngajो शे गोदा ठीक है शिशे रे शा सम तेने समझे थमजे से ताकबे शे चेबा से शंदा तो योंगरवा ओ तिसोदा तेतो मेसेज के दिसा ल्युवा येसु जी कोने सामु तांदा लुजी चेबा से दा के शेदा तिदुसा छेदे दे लेकुदो सम ठीक है शिंबुरे शा सम Tine Shisunen is a jet amjel remember to somebody catcher rover. Oh, did oh, Tini Miguel Chupa, Kiwachu, want to lada me, Kovan Rimji, Tovache, and it Tombani come, Chagda, some members, and it Chanju Semcon, Tagbe Shanchebe, Chanju Semkini, Semje Tamjek troop to get Kawan, Kiran Kusen, and they couldn't Sanje Kovan Tovacha in some. 심제 탐제게 탈침바 툭퉁게게 네가 요소 도바 거네 툭퉁게게 상시에 탈침바 상부 탈침바 상부다 시에니가 탈침베 상게 고바토바 자기 대체도 에네 천년게 예상 냠리 춘중지 제나 대체도 파르도 침바서도 침바 춘중지 단다 침바 데레다 침베 파르도 침바 타르침바 로와 가에나 동버바 텐데 서바 공부에나 가르치나 서통게 sebab parudu chimbe kyurkyurchi se tanda soso chunjunjina kewadi be tarchimba sanje je kobanto be gyurgyuji tende somtamu yora tichene penye lapchi buyung gora o tende sanje ji goban toba cha tichi du che nyenye be kuno setam de sabar shus andi.
So, what we are talking about here is really that Dharma happens when we go out and interact with others in society. How do we talk to them? How do we act with respect to them? And so, here, if in society we just go out and we do things that are harmful, we do things that are non virtuous towards other sentient beings, the way that we sort of restore that, make it right, like in the same way that when we fall, it's the ground that picks us back up again, that we push back up again. We improve by training our minds and changing the way that we treat others in terms of our body, speech, and mind. And we can eventually get to a point where we really, our mind encompasses all sentient beings, and we can do something like exchanging self-cherishing for cherishing others and so forth. But it really begins through the interactions that we have with others on a day-to-day basis. And so we need to remember that that's where it starts, and then we expand out from there. And it is something that where if we practice in this way of really trying to abandon harm and benefit others as much as we can, in stages we will gain a state of a human or a god, and eventually go on to meditating on emptiness, eliminating our attachment and our hostility, and then going beyond that, reaching for the state of Buddhahood, thinking I myself am going to become a Buddha, one who has eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities, who has taken their knowledge to its culmination, their sort of kindness and goodness to its culmination, and has the ability to be of benefit to all sentient beings. So here, when we engage in something like generosity, we should think that although we are at the sort of starting point, may this go toward the cause of the perfection of generosity. Or when we are engaging in patience, we should think, may this go toward the cause of the perfection of patience, knowing that these are the small sorts of seeds, and if we dedicate them as such, they become quite powerful. So here, let's set our motivation for listening to the teachings, thinking that I am listening to these teachings in order to become a fully enlightened Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings.
소래 유랑 신기 두바카바스 소래 유시거라 그까지도서나 비나 소래 유랑 신 두바카바스 네 심다 렌지 케베셔 이문아 래 비타마데셔 미유랑 신기 두바카바테라 어 소아 그러와 미유랑 신기 두바카바스 어디가르스나 통화염네 렉바야세 네 밀람 준데 다니게스 다 토에 유소 때버라 토에 유변다 속 카도다 입투존라 속시거라 다나시 통화염네 렉베유 렉샤 렉베유 소부 렉베유 때려 렉샤시거라 렉베유 시거라 다나시 암조기 토베유들 트라시거라 어때 차주라 다디 니나를 라쿠도 챈다 간거 챈니셰보라 오야 미라시게 쪼바 카바네세 토에 유 수타티르레 잘서 간거 차쇼라 렉베 유 렉차타 부야세 멜람 주데 타니 케세 제저 사마야 멜람리아 지 이동하다 명하다 담다 토에 요라 대토는 원에 이버지 원에 이버 템벌 이버 통그라 멜람 땅두사 이내 원에 템벌에도 요마로 저는 원에 텐디시 요마로 라토나시 어jen다시 멜람 주데스 그마케 생기만은 나를 시켜서 미시 추추자 담다 통초셔라 그마케 시라 되게 따다 랑보다 깨보다 뱀에다 텐데 추세 니들을 통초거라 그가도 시켜 나도 시켜 대우다 신텐데 나도 시켜 에디샤네 버조디 밀야 미니 공가도 시켜서 어디시는 대우디 따다 랑보다 야나 깨보다 뱀에다 텐데 인도가 신텐데 통교하래 특히 버조 밀레바들이야 때문에 그래서 도서 다시 도서 원에 된지도 연구하라. 다른 나나 땅원에 셴바도 연구하래. 가르치나 깨봐 빼면서 가르치나. 나와다 심바니가 유셔라 다야 교마게 코라 쪽에 코라가 나나게 오래 코라를 나 삼잘 코라게 주셔도 코라란지 코라 신자께 제 근데 용거라 이나 원에 매섬하고 가래 나와 예자 심바요 말아 참 어제 김에 말레베 담모치네 그게 통말에 띄우디 통 신디 정아적 신이라 통거를 봐도 통에 그요 말아 어디나시 소설 나왔는데 시tembe o mare sigora ngone si bari sindangi ori yuji ngone chi yobna giwate yo marwa soso shebe wangi tunada chi pige tendi sozu menja chi ni chi toyong gar ma ngone yo marwa odina shiri es kanga kare sigora sene towe yuji ina ngara jo tondo rangone tubes tongore yaga chi na da tuga chi na da kare na da Jambada Tsubara Shala Sobaina Rangwine Roch, Tatal Mabudosa, Jude Rangwine Truba, Yidowa in a Yidowa, Dewaki Jude Rangwine Truba, Rangshin Juba, Rangan Moyo Trubach. Tirede Yomare, Picated Sotan Medrache, so Samutanda Medrache Litene, and then Yodu Yore. Dewaki Jude Sama, Dewaki Vengevaka Yomara, Yidowa Tona Kasha, Yidowa Tongur Kasha, Yidowa Tongura. 자꾸 이 랑군에 이동하지 랑군에 주변 이동하시네 정말 이동하 통고라 그 통고요 말에 되게 따다지게 소소 따다지게 근데 초당 면자실 때 로아 소소 깨지 셰다르지 아무데네 셰데네 근데실 때 다들 야부시도 샤시라 지데 코 따다를 말어 어디 미디 야고레 메도스타그라 자꾸 통도산 대화 영해다 동화 영해 요거라 랑군에 주변요 말에 랑신지 주변 랑고 주변 말에 Jumamboji soda, tele soso samla tandaje keba ruangi. Jene tawada tungeda tike chudwara. Tesonda tobe wangi shabasi wara. Tanyeji wangi shabasi. Yu koranga ne chiri sutube mara. Ya tichton.
So here, picking up from verse 99, which is dealing with the refutation of the object as being inherently established. And so here it reads, that which is seen and that which is touched are of a dreamlike and illusion-like nature. So here, whether we are talking about a visible form, like shape and color and so forth, the things that we see with our visual consciousness, or those things that we touch, or we could talk about, sounds that we hear with our ear and so forth. These are like the objects of a dream or like an illusion. In a dream, we see various things and we, in that dream state, perceive them to be real, but they don't actually exist in the way that they appear. Or it's sort of like an illusion. We could talk about a magician who, and this is the classic example, uses a kind of stick or a stone, and they use some sort of like a mantra or a kind of blessing on that, and it makes there be they can conjure up like an illusory horse or an elephant or something. And so on the basis of the sort of spell that has been cast, those whose eyes are affected, they are going to see this not as a stick or a stone, the sort of basis of that illusion, but rather they will see it as being like a real horse or a real elephant. And so those who are sort of affected by the magic will have both the appearance of that and the kind of clinging to it as real. Whereas for the one who has conjured up that illusion, they see that appearance, but they know it's not real. I mean, sometimes they might have a sort of attachment to it or a clinging, but they do know that it's not actually as it appears. And then you could have someone who walks up later and they don't see this illusion at all. Their eyes are not affected by this spell, and thereby they just see a stick or a stone sitting there. And so here, when it appears to those, again, who have been affected by the kind of magic, it seems to come from the side of the object, to exist really like that, objectively, inherently, or from the side of that. It seems to be existent in the way that it appears, but it doesn't actually exist like that. And so, too, all of the kinds of objects that we encounter with our various senses, they don't exist in the way that they appear. They seem to us to have this kind of existence in and of their own right, objectively from their own side, when in reality they are dependent upon the coming together of various causes and conditions and are affected by our way of thinking. Our way of looking at things affects the way that they appear to us. It seems as though, like, oh, that thing is pleasant in and of itself. But if that were the case, then in all times and for all people, it would have to be something that is pleasurable. But we know that that's not the case. From our experience, we can see that our way of perceiving things, our way of thinking about them or looking at them, affects what they appear to us to be. And so it is a collection, a coming together of many causes and conditions, as well as our own sort of mentally labeling. And so the various, if we say that the causes of our sort of happiness and suffering, those various objects that we take, that we then give rise to feelings about, if those are not truly existent, then so too the kind of feelings that come from them can't really be truly existent either. Rather, it is this comes about in dependence upon a collection of causes and conditions and our way of mentally labeling that, mentally designating that. So we could say that these are merely dependently designated or dependently labeled, not really truly existent.
Dewa Jiji Yu the Kandashi Tongu Nati Rangwini Tuba Rangshin Sudu Kuran Rangshin Jitu Mado Shandaga Tujin Delni Chumego at the Rangshin Sigora. Kura Rangshin get the way Juyin Badan Tunga Juy Bachi Umbi Mare. Dwa Susu Samlutanjo that tended Sotan Medra Medra Chigi Kashel Teveju Kashel Tunga Jutende Judu or Chezati Rangshin Jitu Yomare. Mainge Kashel to an any Papa Tasha to Echiwara. Oh, this year. Ranshinji Tomba Milam da Kume Tangi Soatia, you the Soa, Ranshinji to your mother, you don't want the mama. Teletani give it Soa, there was solution, la Pebet Sujinoa, Never Sujinoa, the Sosu Samutan Juli Keba Mabuda, Tobe Tatangi Wangi, Samuton Dagon Keban to Yare, Tobe Wangi Shabas, Tanya Wangi Shabas, Tanya Seduti. Did the Maris Tanya the Lord Tanya Signora. The chocolate race the Shandala Kagachin to Hakwet and Darwa, Tanya was her. They make here the Kayuri the Shandala Kaga meet them or the kind of love shadow Hakudwa, or Titil Cigarette, or Titil Cigarette, tell a Tanya Sigora, Kaga. Tell a lawyer Tanya down. Try Tanya Signora. Lawyer Tanya Sidu Tambu Ming Tanga the Titi Sabuto Samsa. O di Pumbari, di Kambari, di Tashiri, di Tindurisa, some metal Loitanya Sigora. O di Chichi Reda, di Tashi Reda, di Su Reda, di Trasig Dasne, Tritanya Sigora. She has a figure Toya till Chachin, Chamabuchi, Yochilla, and a di Chichi race for Tasha. Tina ne chick did race Chitanya Yomar, Rangina Yonatina did race Chick Zutu Security Yomar. So couldn't talk all the ten and patch a tash doing it. I look sympathy with it. Oh, they would do say I would charge her. Oh, they come by the Chasha mother. She writes as you found it in a Shira Marva. Oh, this is that is them.
So, the various objects, the things that we see with our visual consciousness or feel with our tactile consciousness and so forth, all of those objects of our senses, the things that are the basis for our giving rise to various feelings, are empty of any kind of inherent existence, like dreams or like illusions. They don't have a nature of being inherently existent. And so when we use this word inherently, or intrinsically, this means to have a kind of existence that is not dependent or contingent upon anything else, that exists like sort of in and of itself without having to depend upon parts and so forth, or causes and conditions, or are mentally labeling it. But rather than having that kind of inherent existence, this is something wherein all phenomena exist in a way in which they are merely designated upon a collection collection of parts, none of which is itself that thing which is so designated. So here we have this is what it means for something to be posited by thought or posited by conventions. And here, when we talk about conventions, we can talk about verbal conventions and sort of mental conventions. So verbal conventions are like the actual terms, the words that we give to things to distinguish it from something else. Like, oh, that is Tashi, or this is a book, or whatever it might be. We use that kind of like sound, that label, in order to identify something. And then there is the kind of thought that we have in our head, the mental label. We're not verbally expressing that, but it is like the way that we think in our head. Oh, that's Tashi. Oh, that's Tundrup. Oh, this is that. And we make that kind of distinction or designation. And the way in which phenomena exists is that we have, again, a collection of many parts. And on that basis, we then put a label. But nothing among those parts can be pointed out and be said to be the thing so designated. We can't point to anything and say, oh, well, this is it. But rather, it is a mere designation on that collection of parts. And we have to be satisfied with that for its existence.
소외 유전랑신지 주바카바라. 다들 유랑신지 주바카서라. 수다트로를 잘라서 와카르는 유라. 다 소화의 소변이 쉐바디스거라. 소외 유전수도 소화 대화 용경이 쉐바 셈 동해 용경이 셈 그래서 쉐바들서 유전수도 유디 동해 쉐바들이야. 유전수거라. 유수도 유지 독자들이거라. 다다다 유랑신지 주요 말이지. 들었더니 소화 유디 용경 소화랑신 요 말이지. 다들 소외 유전 랑신지 주바 갖고 아시도 대가시도서 셈다 렌지 깨베셔서 소화되다 소화용경의 셈니디 균염도 렌지도 깨요나시고라 셈다 소화용경의 셈되다 소화니부디 렌지도 셈냠도 뒤치도 야깨버리나시고라 깨베셔를 소화대 용마에서 균염도 깨버리나 남시 되게 소화된 용하셔고 말이시고라 그러니까 그래서는 나다 냠도 다도 얼마시 용그라 나다 냠도 수도 야나 소화대로 소화들에 매일 소화용경 쉐바대요 야나 소에 치수 쉐바대요나 아니 쉐바대게 소화대 뇨샤도 말해서라 나다 치마를 깨배자 소에 뭐도 소화마기 간에 남바 쉐바대 뇨고 말하티 뇨나 마음바나 치신 텐데 용도 커버레섬 대부 용도 커버레 소화 대화 용도 커버레섬 마도 뭐 스탠다요 말아 또 소화 내 저게 마음바네 아침부터 니마 텐데 소화 용소 섬자 태나 마도 단단 거 소녀한테 요 말아 계시거라 소화를 알았다 뭐도 주밤 소외 치수 주배 장스라 개배자 나는 담바를 주지 마음바를 텐데 용도 커버레섬 니마한테 뇨아래 삼 기타나 마도 단단으로 수녀한테 요 말했어라. 두념도 요 말하고 니까스라. 어따듬죠. 템버를 주지 뇨 말인세. 이 컨디션도스나 소화 셈다 해지게 베실 소화 셈대에 랑신기 통화 많이 되세. 두념도 여바데 랑신기 유디 통고 말해서 그래서 제타데 두념 드라메베 kunyi 제타 데레 카가라와 가와 본반에시 카가라와 제 찍마라와 제타데 뒤념레 이 소화되던 소화용의 시반이든 념도 요라 그래서 kunyi 데메레 드와요 말에 뒤념도 요사 준대 얘네 주딩에는 전 내부된 치수께고라 kunyi 준대 말에 다 뒤념도 요네 칩실 팬도 준대 제게요 말아 뒤념 손자 데메레 드와메바레 두념 저와메바데 랑신지 트베 두념 랑신지 트베 저와메바스나 짠직직치 뜨고 바는 저 코라요 말에 빼다 발라내시 직실 팬에 가야 돼요 말아 어디서 그러라 소화 셈달 해지 깨베서 소화 셈데에 랑신기 통화 마이데 제타데 두념발라 저와메베서 그 두념레 제타데레 네 저와케요 말에 테테 용자 던데게 태 말해서 와라 소알라 나와다 치기베가 소게 나로도게 시바 용제 시바 되게게 그나 산이 토르로 시스타에 맞아 에테레 삼을 도와다 산이 베kim텐데 텐데 치기부 용그레 산나 단데 텐데 산나 사요라고 무슨 여기 오마라 용주라 신상게 되네 시바 치마 엉에마 텐데 텐데 저 텐데 텐데 저 총소아삼 기부 총소아 또 총소아삼 텐데 텐초라 뭐도 스타데 용아데 요마라 소알레 나와다 소에 나르도 소아 용게 시바데 유나스와라 치마리 집에나 소아데 줍사지 대체수 개발이나 쓰거라 소아 템퍼레처에서 마음버리 와야다 이마트데 쇼소서 템퍼레처가 인지서야 대되나 가지라 노아 마에데서 무스탄 용비 오마라 대되나 가바다 마지베 치데 대되나 가사르 냐마 가스라 시바데 치스케 소아데 녜레네 소앙에만 가사라 경어스 요에게 오마라 마음바 용지 소아 용지 제산이 된데 요구를 산다 무슨 용에게 오마라 마음바 들어 도가버려 섬탱기 와르마다지 마기베 치르세 그들도 어 선발해 그들 무시하셔서 그거도서 되도 안에서 어떻게 소셜을 하래 야
So there we've established then the object of a feeling not being inherently existent, and now we turn to the object possessor, or really the consciousness, the subject mind, refuting its being established inherently. And so here, this comes then in verse the second half of verse 99, and then the first half of verse 100. So because feeling arises together with the mind, it is not ultimately perceived. And then I'll just read the next part of this. With two events arising sequentially, the former may be recalled but not experienced by the latter. So here, to turn really to the first of those, the second of those first. So here we have the feeling and the mind that experiences that feeling, right? And so if those are going to exist in a kind of what's the relationship between them? Now here, if they are okay, if they are simultaneous, so the feeling and the mind arise simultaneously, but you are asserting that they both have inherent existence, then that would mean that the sort of one could not inherently perceive the other, because they would be of different substances, and therefore, although simultaneous, have no connection. So no ability to sort of have the mind actually experiencing that feeling. Now, if you go with the second option here, which is that with two events arising sequentially, the former may be recalled but not experienced. So see here, if we have a kind of a situation where the feeling arises before the consciousness that perceives it, well, that consciousness could remember that feeling, but we couldn't say that it's actually experiencing it because it's something that happened in the past. Or if the feeling is something that arises after the consciousness, then we have the sense of that is yet to come. But again, that consciousness wouldn't be experiencing the feeling because it hasn't yet arisen. So here, this if it inherently exists and there is a kind of causal, if we're trying to assert that there's a causal relationship there, for one to cause the other, well, actually, if the feeling comes before the mind that experiences, we can't, again, say that that mind is experiencing that feeling. It's already past. It can recall that, but it isn't the sort of experience of the moment, or there is something that is yet to come. That too is not experienced by that mind because it hasn't yet arisen. So there's the problem if the feeling and the mind are simultaneously generated but sort of inherently existent. They can be simultaneous, but as they are of separate substances, then they wouldn't have any sort of relation. And if one comes before the other, then we can't say that that mind actually experiences the feeling.
rāngi tāngi ñōmi dēsi rwa, 소아 코랑이 소아 코랑 요 말해서라. 소아 코랑이 소아라니 요 말해서. 다 라운데 좀 수지시거라. 랑게 단이 요 메라세. 가르스네 랑이네 랑리스게 쉐요라. 다티 뚝다 바케저라. 랑리스게. 유테 수테 미히데 또르바. 미게 쉐바 코랑 카레토 그래서나. 미게 쉐바 코랑 용게 코랑 다베 치바치자인게 쉐바치 냠도 랑리스게 지와레서라. 그 제타데요 말이 랑리 쉐바 코랑다 냠도 용게치. 랑게 랑리 버리시거라. 그 랑게 랑리 버리요 말이시거라. 영자 녀진이데 니 거르마도. 랑게 랑리 버리 랑리 생게 까기 어떻다. 디나시 쉐바 랑게 당이 저랑 녀아이네 수거라. 그래서 소아 랑게 소아 코랑게 코랑 녀아 마이데 그 랑리 다치 버리는데 랑리 까버리 캐버리서라. 용 말이시거라. 소아 랑게 당이게 소아 랑게 당이 릭바멘데 라리 까베 캐베시르서다. 랑게 당이 뇨메디 사자라. 샹다게 자 뇨마이 사자다. 랑신게 주베 샹다서라. 지단 셰바드 샹다시게 뇨에요라. 랑신게 주베 샹서스나 랑아도 주베 샹나 pen 드라멘게 거다. 드라탄 멘게 치테 랑신게 거라 샹데 치테 랑신 주베 드라메 바꾸야라. 어제 랑신게 주베 샹다게 자 뇨아 마이데스 소아데 뇨아 마이데 뇨자니 뇨제 데메메 뇨자 니부데 랑신게 주베 샹이나 드라게 요 말에 네 유유젠 말에 군이 까 본번하시데 백화가 그 드라메게 자오라. 근데 소르제다 소라 랑신게 마투바르 마세서 말에 소르제 소아르 제바보 랑신게 소아르 제베 소라데 랑신게 마투바 마세 소아 보양시도 총계 강사다 야 유신돼서 소아 본가야 랑신게 투바 여바 메데 강사게 다고 백급수 가스비스 다이베 강사게 다가차르와 강사 다가드나 강사 생베데 랑신게 투바 요 말에 라완도 투바 요 말에세 충도도 투바 요 말에 풍봉알 때네 바딱 봤잖아 강사서 샤고도 마도 풍봉에 나네 지게 요 말에 풍봉알에 로서 강사 생게지 요 말에세 풍봉알 때네 바타네 아니 데레르 차와치바데 강사가 차와치바데 다 누구도 다 되기도 쓰여라 단다 가서래 다메세데 시가하고네 다가치바라 다를 자르네 시하고나 나라저 나가 섬라와레 섬도 소고 바샤 셈바샤 초아 바샤 대도 계속 왕경계를 지키려 섬도 어떻게 말해서 말해 먼저 섬바나시 가려서는 소보치요레 셈시요레 수지 풍부 초래 풍부 두시기 풍부 넘버시 풍부가요레 풍부가드나네 이 강사레서 소소히 되지요 말에 와 대sol에 때네 야 대sol에 백화가 얘기지 뭐 보세요나시 나한테 봐 육샤야 다스 로가지 저찬 맹게지 어때요 말아 다요 말이야 다요 요래 때제 레버런 줘야 주지 때네 다 봐서 풍부가보 대다 강로지 dak시잖아 어디 메르다 어디 때시르다 어디 두르레 누구도 대기도 나대샤시 강가 다해도가 어때 점을 봐샤오래 다 난게데 카데레스네 제게요 말에 이나 가라죠 안나게 삼드베 나시제 난게 셔다 주에 소라지요래 소소소소 약해시 붙이네 소버를 나는 거 나게는 거 나게요라 그때 가사들 뭐 나와 샤고라 나게 가사들 뭐 티도와지 대제는 요게지 로가지게요 말에 샘데 소르고 대줄 때네 가사스 나가서 단단하라서 남주 소소 섬대가한테 남주나시 오마르시거라 남주 가서 가르쳐 거였으나 나가랑게요 라회네 나가랑회네 요삼기래 풍부할 때는 수다네 내가 두개 나대기 세텐데 많이 생거라 나가랑게요 내가 풍부라 내가 섬라 내 초라로 삼기도 길로 로서 rāngwēne rāngshīngi Kurānte rāngshīngi chē mēgō bā, phūmbū ngā lā tēne pā tāne sō mēgō bā, Kurā rāng dī ngā yin sē tsū rāngshīngi tsū tū dā shī sāṅ kōg dā. O tēndē tē yō mā rē sō, tā tē kāngā lā rīg chā yā rē, tsāngwā chīk bā rē, shidhā rā kio jī tā kī rū shī nē shē bā tā shē kōng rā rē. Tā mē kī shē bā tsua tē wā yōng sō yā tē tā gā rē, yu chī yō rē, wāng bū chī yō rē, nē sō sō kāngsā chī yō tē rē, sāmbū rā tā chō, o tē yā bū dō wā sāmbā, sāmbī yō rā, tē kāngsā tē kī tsua tē wā yōng sō shā wā rā. Tā yōng shē tsua tē kāpā ndō, pūchī lō ndō bē, nā lō ndō bē, wāng bū nā lō ndō bē sī nē, tē nē rā yā kē yō mā rē. Tēnē tsai yu mē rē kua, tēnē tā pa sāṅ. O tī sī yō rā. Tā tī rī sāṅ sā kā lē sō. O tī bā. Rāngi tāñi nyō mē lā, shandā kī jā nyō mā yī sā. Rāngwē nē chū bē, shandā chī kī nyō shē, shandā chī nyō shē, shandā chī nyō mā rē. Rāngwē nē chū bā shē tī yī na, dhawā mē kē tī kō kō, rāngwē nē chū bē shē yī na, ku nī dhawā chē yō mā rē. Rāngshīn jī chū bē shē sē rā tā. 소왕 가야 유면 돼서 어디를 다 준다. 소화집에 소화야랑 신기 두어요 말에 소화부 강사랑 신기 두어요 말에 대달이야 강사 그 다음에 셰베 값이 셰사래 시거라. 어디나 셰스브레 티치주나야.
So then here, turning to the second half of verse 100, it says, then feeling does not experience its own nature, or doesn't experience itself, nor is it truly experienced by anything else. And just to read the first line of 101, there is not any extrinsic experiencer of a feeling. And so here, this gets into a little bit of what we had seen earlier with the connection to various tenet schools who assert a self-cognizing consciousness, something that is this kind of, it's of the same substance of mind that is aware of mind. And so here, it says that there's like, feeling is not such that it experiences itself. This is because there is no like inherently existent other the feeling and then the experiencer of that feeling. If there were so here in the second line of or sorry, it's the final line of verse 100, where it says, nor is it truly experienced by anything else. So here, as we have already refuted that kind of self-cognizing consciousness, it's not as though feeling is aware of itself. I mean, conventionally speaking, we can say that a mind experiences a feeling. It's not as though feeling experiences itself. But if it comes to someone who is asserting some kind of inherently existent self and feeling, it's not as though we can have a feeling and the sort of consciousness experiencing that feeling that are inherently or intrinsically sort of autonomously existent, because then there could be no relation between those two. They would be totally unconnected, like a pot and a pillar. We wouldn't have any ability for that consciousness to have an experience of that feeling because they are autonomously sort of independently existent. And so here, the experiencer itself, so we've established that the kind of experience is not inherently solidly existent from its own side, but the experiencer too is not sort of inherently truly existent in this way that it appears to us, as having like kind of a solid autonomous existence, which is not dependent upon anything else. So in general, we can say that there is a person. There is a person who is dependently designated upon the collection of the five aggregates. And so we have our form aggregate, our feelings, our discriminations, our karmic formations, and our consciousness. And whatever those various aggregates do, we can say the self does. But it isn't as though there is either among the aggregates something that we can point to as being the person, that we can say, oh, yes, that is it. But nor is there something separate and apart from the aggregates that we can say is the self, the person. And so it feels to us like there is, though, some kind of person, this I that is in control of the aggregates, that they, as though they had like this sort of ability to wield power over them or something. But when it comes to how this actually exists, there can't be some sort of person separate and apart from the aggregates. It's only on the basis of those aggregates that we can have the thought of I, or like upon seeing someone else's form, we can think, oh, that's Tashi, that's Tundrup, and so forth. And we can speak about someone coming and going and so forth based upon where their form aggregate goes. But if we were to try to search and say, well, where is it that there is this kind of person, this I within those aggregates? Again, there's nothing that you can go and point to among the aggregates, but nor could there be something separate and apart entirely. So, like when we say, like, have an intense experience, like say, oh, I'm really sick, it feels like there's this I that is so solid, that is so sort of existent in and of itself from its own side, not something that is merely dependently designated upon an experience that, say, your form aggregate is having. But it seems like there is this I that's really there in and of itself. But when we investigate, we can see that there's no way that there's an I, a person that is separate and apart from the aggregates. And when we look in this way, we can see that, again, neither is there something among the aggregates, nor is there something separate and apart. It simply doesn't exist in that way that it appears to us. This person is something that is merely designated on the basis of the aggregates. And as it is said, as you understand the person, so too understand all phenomena. We apply this same kind of reasoning to all other phenomena. We search for, say, the feeling. We can't find something that is that feeling, but it's rather dependently designated. And so this feeling isn't inherently existent, nor is the feeler, the person who experiences that.
Tena tsoa te kona nido tuba memba te darase taga na shin segura tsoa te kona nido maduwa se tena dambar maduwa tembar maduwa segura nawa na shin taga na shin maduwa nawa shin do maduwa se te kona shin do tena tsoa te kona nido tuba memba te dar rangshin gi tube ta mebe pumbe tsoa te la se rangshin gi tube ta yo marwa pumbu nga yo mato telia rangshin gi tube ta chi yo mare tene ta kwa samji ta yo mato telaya soa dewe penpa se rangshin gi tube soa chi sha rangshin gi tube soa nyonggen chi sha te tele penpa da rangshin gi tube soa nyonggen tungge nyonggen chi sha tungge rangshin tube sha te tele neba atende yo mare se tandara diso rangshin gi tube ta mebe pungbu sorwa pungbu de la se soa dewe penpa ya penpa da te yo mare soa tungge di chi de neba chawa tungge rangshin gi tube yo mare penpa tungge penje dewa rangshin gi tube yo mare se te inde soa kande chi na dewa da tungge kande chi na rangshin gi tube rawa do tube soa meba soa tempa nisha soa tempa matuba soa tempa matuba soa tempa matuba tempa sha ne ti lo la chara chen ti kan le tempe yani yando tene ti kombore soa tempa nisha kombar cha oso da o te suna tene ka do membe soa tempa nisha kombala beba resource namjura soa tungere china soso samlota na pengero o tungere se shibuche tungere chigwa soso semgi 망보 소셔거라 슈첨부 따다 대인도 sembraci yingya shendaci yagara chi shesuna tungedi tozerga mewa chagdwa yang susu samludan chati tungedi samludan digira san susu semgi kachi keba dugyara ta tingsan ko chowa tenpa nisha kongge kachi susu nagi ino chowa dewa tungedi kari kiri ina chowa tungedi kesar chen gora nagi ino tingwa nasa tiga kawa nagdo se tinte yiten tegyara and Paruji Nasa Trabe Kishadua Nasa San Matagate Soa Tombani Kone Nasa the country with the courage and Nagura Kawado, the Tene Rayake Omara Kasha saw the Suzutanga when you go some annual data. Neither the Kusuna Chase or a Kenya Yomara Suzulu Tagiomara. Okay, the Kosu some of the times or Kevashida you take. Sorkuta, we are this one and this.
So then in the rest of verse 101, it then reads again, so just to read the whole verse, there is not any intrinsic experiencer of a feeling, and in reality, there is no feeling. So there is no such a feeling as it appears to us, this ultimately existent feeling, this truly inherently existent feeling. In it being the case that this composite, this composite of various things, is identityless, then who is hurt by this kind of unreal feeling? So here, therefore, feeling is, and it uses this word like not established suchly, or not ultimately established. It's not inherently or truly existent, but rather this sort of composite of these aggregates, which lacks a self, which is not established inherently. These feelings that, again, are not inherently established, what sort of benefit can they do, and what kind of harm can they do? Because, for example, suffering is not inherently established. And so here, it says then that one should make an effort at this kind of practice of the mindfulness of feelings. And so here, this can be helpful when we are experiencing some kind of suffering, to reflect upon this fact that isn't inherently existent. It isn't ultimately or truly existent, but rather our way of thinking about this influences it. If we get distracted away, all of a sudden our suffering seems less because our mind isn't focused on that. We're looking at something else. Or if we can, sometimes these days they talk about doing a practice of mindfulness, like if you have a headache, to try to find, well, where is that pain? Where is that suffering? And when you can't actually locate it, you can't find something that you can point to, it sort of dissipates. It isn't really there. And so here we should recognize that the way that our feelings appear to us, they don't actually exist as such. And doing this kind of an analysis and investigation is really making an effort at the mindfulness of feelings. And this is something that, again, can be very beneficial to us when we are experiencing some kind of intense feeling, to examine it in this way and recognize that it's not ultimately really truly established. And this can be very useful, helpful for us, particularly when we are suffering, to have this kind of recognition.
Cho nên chúng ta khi thiền quán về cảm thọ thì chúng ta sẽ không tìm ra được nó tồn tại ở đâu. Nên cũng vậy, khi chúng ta ngủ thì chúng ta không bị đau đầu, tại vì chúng không có cái tâm để tác ý, để gán đặt cho cái đau đó. Cho nên mục đích như vậy, khi chúng ta thiền quán về tính không để tìm cái cảm thọ, thì chúng ta sẽ không tìm thấy cảm thọ đó. Cảm thọ chỉ là không tự tính, nó rỗng không. Cho nên những cái cảm thọ khổ đó nó sẽ biến mất.
Đi sẽ được. Ôi à, tăng ngã tu đi rồi đó cả sẽ được. Xem chăm bao nhiêu sao, luyện chăm bao nhiêu sao, xoa chăm bao nhiêu sao, xem chăm bao nhiêu sao sẽ gọi đó. Nên chơi chăm bao nhiêu sao, chăm bao nhiêu sao sẽ gọi đó. Đó luyện đó xoa trên đi sai đó, xem chăm bao nhiêu sao sẽ gọi đó. Xem tông bao nhiêu là chăm bao nhiêu thì sẽ gọi đó. Đó thì xem để đi sẽ gọi cả sẽ được. Như vậy đó. 예지 예지 쉐바랑시지 마주바다 남시랑시지 마주바 이시도 예지 쉐바스도 가서 뭐가 있었다 지단 넘버 쉐바스는 남시 초주요라 미기 넘버 쉐바 수 통계 카도다 입 통계기 명할 때네 개별 넘버 쉐바들 미기 넘버 쉐바스고라 미기 왕부가 다진시니 기요라 미기 넘버 쉐바 नवे नंबर सेवा नवे वंबे ताकि चेने ट्राथे गेतल नवे नंबर सेवा ने नंबर सेवा टी ने वंबे ताकि चेने टी नंगे सेवा तल ने नंबर सेवा ने रो न्यो गेगे नंबर सेवा तल रो नंबर सेवा रो रेजा रेजा लिगि रेजा छावा छावा और वन जब चुबल सो न्यो गे नंबर सेवा द लिगि नंबर सेवा ने वंबो सोचे बस ग्रातला मेवा नवा चेवा लेवा दला सूर्य तुदु टुबारे देवारा वंबो सोचे बास गरा तेजोले तेनी केगे शेबतला वाशे सेवरा वाशे वंबो शेबास गरा ताति मेंबर यीजी शेबजो तेजो गंगा थोने ने संगे सामुतांगे सिदवा ओतेले यीजी शेबास गरा येवाला तेने शेबा कोना की गरा पेनागा जो मिलम तांदे शेबाते यीशिरवा 이지 시버래 미고 공부도 내가 지금 말해 메와 나와 저와 내가 내가 지금 말해 이내 시버거라 이지 시버거라 지게지게 에도와 틀려 이시스거라 지단 넘버 시버스나 소주요래 강가 넘버 시버래 미 넘버 시버 나가 넘버 시버 내 넘버 제 넘버 시버 이지 넘버 시버스 넘시 소주스거라 이지 시버스도 미게 넘버 시버도 이지 시버 가서 이지 넘버 시버 말와 이 नंबर से तो युवा लेते हैं शेबा लेते हैं शेबा खोरा ताकि चले क्या होंगे किसी और मिलम भी शेबा तब या ना मेरी सोच तो मैं मालूम जो समृता सूद तिंडे से दो सौ समृता को दो आती ये जिसे बरवा हम जो ट्राई थे दावे से बरवा और ता तिंडे से सुधा ट्राई चिंसा ने समृता आते के दो आती ये जिन नंबर से बरवा समृता के मांग चाहते ये जिन नंबर से बचरे 원부 넘버 시버도 카드 수드 통마도 시다고 내가 시다게요 말에 야분도 소아 템베스기뇨 네베스 이동하면 되지요라 디젤 안에 삼을타에 가면 이게 시버도 서울다 그래 다들 야분도 다 지제 뭐만도서는 공동하게 차도 대세 가가 용해도 이게 시버도 거라 디제네 다 담보데 가르시도 세나 이게 시버 이제 쉐바 라시게 메바테 바세 티셰도아 오야 이제 쉐바 라시게 메바타바 티마조 쉐베토 데르다 남주 섬을타테 미숨테나 암조 갑테나 로 나고만노나 칼게메 라샤메나 소소 섬다이스토아 메람지 쉐베타보 오테즈카가 이제 남바샤 티랑신 집투바요 마르스테데도아 이네 왕남라 미네세 이게 쉐바데 다 유강가 또도와 이 쉐바데게 소다티로 렉샤 원부 넘버 쉐바도 줄 식차 또 대체라니 이게 넘버 쉐바데 삼로타야 모도야 원메도 삼로 강가 코동가 게타도 가르케네 끼그라 이게 넘버 쉐바데 마키도 자 이게 넘버 쉐바데 유튜브를 주고도 미가 통해 유 카도다 입실을 주고도 수자 티로 렉샤 최 대주 상말을 주고도 대주 상말 이유도 제토고도 그래 얘기 넘버 18도 미기 넘버 18데 수 카도다 입도 통그르마도 샨다 통해요 말아 나 넘버 18데 다장자 통그르마도 샨다 시야요 말아 내 넘버 18데 뒤장자 소그르마도 샨다 시 말아 제 넘버 18데 로장자 시그르마 샤도마 미기 넘버 18데 렉자 잠바다 주보 차와다 장화세 대용그마도 샤다케라 망셔데 이지 넘버 18데 유튜브가 내 삼르타도도 망셔데 이지 18데 삼르탄도 원베 18도 카두카도리 유데 18마도 시다케게 제메도 제데 제데도 이네 원남라메네스 이지 18데 원부터 내가 원나요 원보체 원보르죠 원보라에네요 말레스 라시지 트베스지 ene wangbo truti la deg mares wara yene wangbo la menese wangbo nam ning mare wangbo tui ba 미경보 나경보 내경보 지경보 류경보 이경보 그 유튜브가 생겨라 길 매니저 수소라메 바나메세 근데 수로 소바 유라네 말이잖아 유튜브 여봐 수타테로 레자 슈스투 여라 유튜브들에 내 말이서 라고네 투베스 내가 말이서 또 이지 시바데 유튜브라 요 말에 원부투들에 내가 말이서 여라 얘네 왕남라 메네세 미와 나와 제와 뜻을 틀네 때 되게 말이서 여라 유수를 내게 달네 게 틀네 게 뜻을 내가 말이서 여라 얘네 왕남라 메네세 수소라메세 Sula soba making to Sula soba YouTube the leg maresa. Niwala soba wombo to the leg mares, Ranshin to the leg maresa. Naya Mayese, Nanglea, Kobe Nalo to Basiliaco, Nene, or the Chiribari, Nangachi, Vetusigra, Kansa de Kobasa, Kobe Nalolia, they were Nagachima. 시들이야 가사 소리 지어라 지 다세 남이 다세라 남게 집에 주서 나로를 거기 나로 때려요 그래서 어디 날씨 때요 말해서 오라 나나 마이세 나나 마이 치마이세 아치로래 같은데다 셴도 야니 마이 대달에 셴다치리 대대보다 되네요 말해서 오라 그것이 의미 셴도미 already what lotion camera, mount camera. Already thought lotion and castle. Or the Ines rushing YouTuber made this or a wombo two punamla rushing YouTuber menace, yen one menace. Sula soba you two la rushing YouTuber again, Malaysia. The day Pana menace, wombo two you two, the wombo two Nigalia, Sopalia. Negative day neg mares, partners, you don't want Buniga Palpa capture, generation air, generate neg mares. Oh, Collection. Today, the partner, the new Sokbala and Menes, never miss. Oh, the Umajubakasuya, the Kasuda, Shinda Rayala, Le Shandimes, Shinda Singate, Ragayala Kolo. 대사다 대절래 로스 신데 세시 오마라 샤메 마이세 와 신데 라엘라레 샹데메 샤메바 야나 코라츠나네 치기 바다 텐데 마레세 신데나 샤메마 텐데 야메세 야나 토주야 코카스라 뎀바 뎀베스게 오마레세 두바사마 치치라 야라텔야 신대 대셔베 주기때 신대를 야라 대셔베 주기때 스데요 말해서 되바sam에 입디야 말해서 예 신대를 신대 셰미만 텐데 야라는 야라다 되바sam에 이미시신 어떤데 강래 내고도서 신대데 라게 야라 수도 차셔도 좀 쓰려라 차셔데 신대도 차셔서라 강바를 전에 차셔 강바들어 차도도 가래 고다 기공다 집바다 토다 너바리 연계 강배 차셔도 강다 차시로 차신스도 강배 들어와 어때나시 남들에 지나고 차신데 남들와 참만 보여라 실로 바과다 콜로다 나로다 담에만 보여라 어떻게 차다 차신스라 라게 야라스도 차들스거라 신대 고란데 차진 들어와 신다라 해라래 신대메 신미마이 텐데면 어디나 신다데 이 넘버 쉐바데 로 원부터부터야 라신기 투베스기 내 말에 로 ene chobala ne mare so tinde na shi ta to je na ko pangwe ne yo na ko kades ne go chi te no de re sha se ko ra o tinde se ne mare sti cha do ya subada shinde namje shinde la ta de ni ko na number she ba de chamba she tine she de so la pa sam la ta ya re so bare o tipo de chi tu na de tsawa de da ka sa oh yine wang nam la menese so la mese yu ombu tu la de mare yu tu la de mare sera rangone tu se naya ma yeso nange sobolia nalolia chiruba nange chive kibu de na shitende chene ne mare se naya semde mene chimai te chirudo le chirudo chile ne naguda godan kamba twa ne te chole ne mare se ora Shendo yana nye mayana tedale shenpa chine nye gribesi yoribesi te rahe go maresi ora. O tiba de chikune tambo mauda shire.
So now here we arrive at the meditation on the close placement of mindfulness on the mind. So we've had the mindfulness of body, feelings, now we're at mind, and then we'll get to phenomena. And so really this is placing the kind of mindfulness on the emptiness of mind. And so here to read then verse 102 with which this will be dealing, it says, mentality or mind is not located among the sense organs, nor in form and so on, nor in between them. The mind is not found inside the person, nor outside, nor anywhere else. So here, when we think about mind, we have our six consciousnesses, but here we're going to be talking primarily about the mental consciousness. And so the mindfulness of mind has two parts, actually, dealing with teaching the lack of inherent existence of the mental consciousness, and then teaching the lack of inherent existence of the other five sense consciousnesses. And in general, they're all consciousnesses, right? But our sense powers are those that arise from the dominant condition of a physical sense power. So we have the kind of our six consciousnesses: our visual consciousness, which perceives forms, our audio consciousness, which perceives sounds, our sort of olfactory consciousness, which perceives smells, our gustatory consciousness, which perceives taste, and our tactile consciousness, which perceives touch. And then there is the mental consciousness, and that can take any of the objects of any of those six types of objects, right? So our sense powers are materially established, and on that basis, they give rise to particular consciousnesses that have the ability to only sort of directly perceive a particular type of object. So our visual consciousness can only see forms, it can't perceive sounds, and so forth. Whereas the kind of, these are all consciousnesses, right? But our mental consciousness is really the most expansive. It can take the most different types of objects. And so like if we think about our mental consciousness is the only one that is functioning when we are dreaming, but we can have various sorts of objects of mind. It's what we perceive as being sort of like visual objects or things that we're experiencing in that dream consciousness. And so here we could also think about it. We see, say, a form with our visual consciousness, and then we close our eyes, and our mind can remember that. It can take it as an object. So those various sense consciousnesses directly encounter various types of objects, and that's really what they do, is they perceive those objects, but they don't get into the kind of conceptualization that our mind does. Once that mental consciousness takes those various objects, then our mind gets involved. We get all of these various thoughts about them. Various afflictions arise: our anger, our animosity, our attachment, our desire, our pride, our jealousy, and so forth. So really, the mind, the mental consciousness is the main kind of our mind. I mean, we can close our eyes and cover our ears and cut out all of those other objects, but the mind will still take all kinds of various objects. So when we think about the way that these work, again, the five sense consciousnesses, which are based upon a physical sense power. The mind has the mental sense power, which is actually non-material, as its dominant condition, as its basis. But those others that are based upon particular physical sense powers are only able to perceive certain types of objects. They kind of directly, barely perceive them, like sort of nakedly, and then the mind gets involved. And so when we then have our mind get involved again, all of those kinds of various afflictions arise. But so when we ask, well, where is the mind located? So the mind or mentality is not located in the sense its organs. We can't sort of locate it as inherently existing within the various kinds of powers, nor does it inherently exist within the sort of objects that it takes. Nor could we locate the mind as being so here as being within the body. Like it's not, there are some traditions where they sort of point to like there's an inner self that almost exists like within the sort of like not your stomach exactly, but the inner part of the body, and then there's our sort of external self. But there's nothing like that that we can point to as the mind within this body, as if there was somehow something we could locate. So here, as it says in the commentary to this, the mind is not inherently established. It doesn't inherently abide within any of the six powers, not in the mental sense power, nor in any of the others. And it also doesn't abide inherently within any of the objects. It can take form and so forth as its object, but it doesn't exist within those objects, nor does it exist somehow in the coming together of those objects, as if there's some sort of overlap and then that's where mind exists. It doesn't exist in the sort of in between, but nor could it be found anywhere else. So here, again, as is explained here, it gets then into how the mind, again, it doesn't exist as sort of in between, nor is it exist in the coming together of those two, the object and the sense power. We can't identify something that is mind. And so here, like the way that is taught in the Entry to the Middle Way by Chandrakirti, with the analysis of the chariot, when we search out, we can't point to something that is the mind. So again, when we have something like a chariot, we can use other examples as well, but it doesn't, I won't give the exact verse here, but it's not its parts, nor is it outside of the parts, nor does it possess those parts, nor does there exist a relationship of support and supported, as if the chariot were the support for the parts or the parts were the support for the chariot, nor is it the mere collection of those things, nor is it the form, but it is rather something that is merely dependently designated. So we have like the parts and then the thing that possesses those parts. And when we look at the relationship between them, there isn't some kind of relationship of one being the support for the other in this inherently existent way, nor is there kind of relationship of one possessing the other. When we think about something like a house, for example, and we can say the house is the thing that is the possessor of all of those parts which make it up. But when we look at it, it's not just the parts itself, nor could it be something apart from the parts. It doesn't somehow possess that or act as the support for that, nor is it the mere collection of those or the shape of that, but rather a house is something that is merely designated upon that collection of parts. Or sort too, could we talk about like a plane or any other kind of thing? It's not it's sort of the outside shell or the various computer components or the wings or whatever, but rather it's something that is merely designated in dependence upon that collection of parts. And so when it comes to the mind, it doesn't exist inherently within the sense powers themselves, nor within the objects that it takes. It doesn't have that kind of objective existence from its own side. Thanks.
Oh, yeah. 그래서 어디르다
무테페
강시 르미세 나버시바도 소이 이게 나버시바도 르마르스 르르데마마이세 르레 셴도 네버르스 테마르스 강시 르미 셴도 미세 르다냠도 드레네 네데버스 테네요 마르세 드레미세 아니 르레 로스 양가르와치네 코다짱짱 모보세고나시 따발라나시 벨로가치 요르베스네 텐데네 러시 주베시 데마르세 로스야 양가로와 그 코란짱짱 양가로스 코란짱짱 르레 벤제메데세 네버도 양가로스라 양가와 네가 베텐데 마르세 네 중세 민디 셔르세 아니 심제라시 어디 양에 르레 심제 Ramune Truba Chungsanya, Yoba Mimbati Chenase, the Simja Rashi Yang Des, Simjan Sim Des, number Shibates or each number Shibate, Ramune Truba Tombatella, Ranshin Yang Devas, Ranshin Yang Devas, Sim Ranshin Matubatella Sigara. Yi Sheba Ramune Meba, Ranshin Matubate, Ranshin Yang Des. Ranshin Trube Tongbe Chas, the Ranshin Yades Wintera. Take on Balatane, Ninamo, Tandra, so Teogora, or Tipchikuna, and this one.
So then continuing into verse 103, it says, it is not truly in the body. So the mind can't be located somewhere within the body, nor is it somewhere else. We can't point to the mind separate from the body, nor is it truly mixed with the body, nor is it anywhere apart. It is not truly anything at all. So, and here the way that it's translated, so sentient beings are fully liberated. I'm going to say, so sentient beings are sort of naturally at peace or beyond suffering. So here the mind is not something that we can identify or locate as inherently existing within the body, nor could it be like separate and apart, like isolated, not unconnected from the body, sort of like blue and yellow, or an ox and a cow, or something like that. But rather, it has no such existence from its own side. So here, where it says that they're sort of naturally, and it's really the term for nirvana, is referring to their being free from any kind of true existence, or empty of true existence from their own side.
Look at this. Oh, dear. Yeah. Oh, and the talk about this. Oh, did this one. I thought that. Namshinga. Namshinga Ranshinji Mebatemba Satelita. Oh, did this. The Taurus Kaidwa, you had Caption better. Oh, that is so. Oh, that.
Ở đây nói là năm thức nó không có tự tính, nên là ở đây để nói
So
rằng
I guess this evening we're going to be ending a little bit early, so we will leave here at teaching the lack of inherent existence of the five sense consciousnesses. We'll stop there.
Today we have to end up a little bit earlier due to His Holiness teaching online. So Siko need to prepare for His Holiness teaching. So okay, so tomorrow Sunday morning the same, and teach His Pandita's teaching again, which is teaching at 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Tomorrow, yes, Sunday. Tomorrow Saturday? Oh, sorry. So tomorrow at 7 p.m. to 4 p.m. Yes. Course, Katina course.
Yeah, koso. Yeah, teaching.
Anybody want to